Today's lesson or gathering topic continues the lesson I started last week, which was a brief history of unity. One of the things I've noticed about our co-founders and the early leaders of the unity movement is that on the surface, if you looked at their lives as young people, as we discussed last week, they really weren't remarkable particularly. You know, they were people who had health challenges. They were people who had economic challenges. They were people who were traveling throughout the Western United States, trying to fit in with societal norms about what it meant to be a female teacher, about what it meant to be a man with a physical disability, and challenges with walking and other things, and how their lives really created this unity movement through their own experiences. And one of the ideas that came up for me many years ago, and I've kind of been working with it since, not only as a historian, but also in my own life, is the idea that no gift is too small. Let's face it, you know, when we get to Christmas, and forgive me, but I was in a store yesterday and they had some Christmas decorations up, and I was like, it's August, we're not even back to school yet. Okay, rant over. But as we look at, you know, as we get into that season, you know, well, if you can't buy your spouse a car for Christmas, you know, somehow you're less than, somehow your relationship is less than. You know, if you can't buy them something expensive, that there's a less than, or there's an unworthiness. And that's really not the truth with a capital T about each of us. We have gifts. So what I'd like to do today, and if you haven't already done so, if you're not someone who takes notes, you might want to have a way to take some notes here, because I have 5 questions for you. And I'd like you to consider spending a little time with these questions for yourself. I do this on a fairly regular basis. I have had a number of opportunities to learn different techniques for determining my gifts. Some of them include things like the Enneagram, the Myers-Briggs test, the hero scale. I've done academic tests to see what kind of person in a career I might like. And by the way, those were pretty off, but I clearly didn't know that teaching and sharing a message through Zoom was going to be my passion, because the time I took those tests, the internet was still in its infancy. So we have these opportunities to learn and grow and develop from them. So our first question for our morning, after we talk about will, forgot I left this slide in. Our monthly power is will, the ability to choose, lead, and decide. And so part of this is about willingness to share our gifts. And learning to activate the divine will in your life does not mean that you will simply submit to the human will of others. So this is, as I said last week, this is part of Unity's structure that Charles Fillmore implemented, just to try and break down spiritual things into smaller points. So each month you take in a different faculty until you have all 12. Whole other lesson, whole other course. Our first question: what gift or gifts do I have? And, you know, as I presented this material in different formats over the years, let's look at the Fillmores first, just because, you know, it's always easier to look at someone else and say, oh, they have the gift of, they have that capacity for. So let's look at Myrtle. She loved children. She wanted to be a teacher. She wanted to engage with the next generation. She clearly was a great teacher. Primary source material at the time record that on the day of her wedding, at which point her contract as a teacher was terminated. She could no longer teach except at the home in an informal way. In terms of being a formalized paid teacher, that wasn't possible anymore. The rules at the time were, if you were married, you had to leave your job. Women could not be married, because heaven forbid that you should have to deal with that question of, teacher, why is your stomach getting bigger and bigger? And where are you going for the next couple months? And why is your tummy no longer as big as it was? And what's that baby doing in your arms? We don't want to have to deal with those questions. So Myrtle had this capacity for teaching, for sharing with young people. not only with her own three sons, but with the Unity community. It was she who developed We Wisdom, which was our children's magazine that ran for about 100 years. That's a pretty significant length of time to have a children's magazine running. And I actually remember seeing that magazine in my public library as a child, which kind of blows my mind to think that I was exposed to Unity before I even knew what Unity was. So when Myrtle is watching this movement unfold, this creation that her healing and her ability to tap into spiritual principles had led to, she said, basically, what is mine to do? Who will take care of the children? And the answer came back to her, you will. And that's, the whole family ministry is thanks in large part to Myrtle. Silent Unity is in large part to Myrtle. That was her gift to us, to set up some ideas about how to pray in an affirmative way, in a positive way, and to move away from the guilt and shame and blame of the teachings that she had as a child. Turning to Charles for a moment, he had, I've tried to think about how long his resume would have been. But if I was to boil down, because he had odd jobs here, there, and everywhere as he traveled around. But he had worked in a bank, he'd worked with a grocer, he'd worked with a printer. He became an assayer, which is somebody who takes pieces of rock and figures out what kind of metals are in there, what kind of value those stones have, and if there's, some kind of mine that could a vein of copper or of quartz or of other valuables, or gold even. So he had that capacity. So as the Unity movement grew and it was decided to move the headquarters out of the city into what was then the suburbs, now you never know it because it's surrounded by highways on all sides. But he had the capacity to know where the good land was. He had that skill set. He knew how to print things. And so Unity started as a tract society. The foundations of the prayer group needed to be disseminated, and he had the skill set to know how to do printing. He had the skill set to know that records were the next, great way of communicating. They recorded their own records, the 78s. You can hear some of those at truthunity.net. So what gifts do we have? It might be that we don't see ourselves as having a large gift, and it doesn't have to be a large gift. It's something, though, that is uniquely ours. I'm sure you've all seen signs or tea towels that say, find what you want to do and do it because the world needs more people like that. So I invite you to do an inventory. It may be that you are the world's fastest towel folder. One of my skill sets is I know how to fold fitted sheets, but it is not for sale. I'm not able to be hired because one of the jobs I had as a teen was as a housekeeper. And so I got really good because my job, instead of doing all the vacuuming, was to go to the laundromat with all of the bedding for the retreat center I worked at and do all the laundry. I got real good at folding sheets. Things like that can be a gift to the world because you can take it and apply it. And, you give me anything, I can fold it. I can make things fit in my trunk that you would swear fit. So things that might not seem to the world like they're useful. I invite you to do that inventory. You might be surprised, or you might find something you used to do as a child and it got told, oh, that's childish. Look at it. Maybe you're really good at picking color schemes that are contrary to, the societal norms, that your clouds are purple and your sky is pink with polka dots and all of these wonderful things. So as I said, Charles and Myrtle had these gifts. They had this capacity. Each on the surface would not look like they would have been, people who would found a worldwide movement. One of the things I love about these two as well is that they were humble about their gifts. As we see it so much with media the way it is right now. Are you a TikTok influencer? I'm not. And that's fine. I'd like to think that I gently and calmly influence people by uploading these talks to my YouTube channel. But what can we pull from this? Can we look at them and say, okay, how can I see myself reflected in their lives? Question 2, am I willing to share these gifts with the world? There may be some that you're not willing to share because societal norms say that they're not valued. And it might be that you just get enjoyment out of it, and that's all that needs to be, or that it's part of your spiritual practice, and that's where it needs to be. I saw some recently on Facebook of young men who are incredibly skilled at crocheting, at knitting, at sewing, and they're being shamed for being male and doing these artistic crafts. And their family members are saying, no, there are people out there that will support you. There are people who will not bully you. There are people out there that will crowdsource, and they will buy you the best sewing machine so that you can be the best that you can be in this skill. And so that's one of the things. There are some skills that I have. There are some gifts that I have that I don't share, and that very few people outside my immediate family know about. And that's perfect. Healthy boundaries are part of spiritual growth. I'm going to say that again. Healthy boundaries are part of spiritual growth. Just because you make the best pinwheel sandwiches doesn't give the rest of the world the right to assume and demand that you make pinwheel sandwiches for every event. It's perfectly well to say, no, this is part of me that I do not want to share. And here's the part I am willing to share. Here's the part that I am willing to put forward and say, use me, in the sense of not abuse me, not misuse me, but make use of my skills. Provide me an opportunity, an opening to share. Question 3, how do these gifts align with the gifts of people in my circle? Let's face it, it would be really boring in life if we all had the same gifts and there was no change or opportunity to have differences and see differences and interact with differences. Example from my own life. I put myself through university working in a fast food chain. Well, if everybody was pouring drinks, nothing would get served. You needed somebody to flip the burgers. You needed somebody to take care of the fries and onion rings. You needed somebody to package the food and make sure that it was presented to the customer in a pleasant way. You needed somebody to do desserts. You needed somebody to do each of these tasks. Now, you can have people who know how to do all the tasks, but often you'll find that some people have a niche for some. I was really good on the grill. I was even better at actually providing the sandwiches. I could make the company standard was 10 seconds to make a sandwich any way the customer ordered it. I could do it in 8 consistently. And that was one of my gifts that I brought to my employer, and I was rewarded accordingly. So the thing was that there was one summer, we had the most amazing shift. We had the orders out before the person could move from the cash register to the pickup area because we were working together as a team. Now, that's a very human, physical example, but let's look at the Fillmores again for a moment. So I've already shared the gifts of Charles and Myrtle. Grandma Fillmore, Charles's mother, Mary, was the queen, absolute queen of being able to take some vegetables from the garden, a handful of lentils, and feeding an army. And it was not uncommon for Charles, when they were out at the farm, for him to say after a lesson, come on over, mom's cooked dinner, or lunch or whatever it was. And she would feed literally 50 people. And from all accounts, it was something she enjoyed doing, something she was skilled at because of the economic circumstances she had grown up in, she had raised her family in. She had that gift. James Dillard Freeman describes it as, the capacity to take nearly nothing and make an abundance out of it. The 3 boys. So Lowell, the eldest son, his gift to the Unity movement was that upon his father's retirement as the administrator, he became the administrator of the Unity movement. He did not take over the spiritual aspects of that. That went to Ernest Wilson, another name, another talk altogether. But he was the one that kept the Unity movement going. He had the vision that his parents had. Lowell was the only one of the sons who actually wrote a book, and it was about prayer and how to use spiritual principles in your daily life. So Lowell is the gentleman on the left. The gentleman in the middle is their son, Rickard, number 2 son. He had actually started to follow a career in art. He went not only to the Chicago School of Art, but he went over to Europe. If you have been to Unity Village, you may enjoy the architecture there. That was his gift. He had this idea that the administrative buildings, for the most part, were going to be very kind of Spanish, with tile roofs. And what you may not realize is that Rickard was one of the pioneers in prefabricated building. People would come to Unity Village to see how that huge administrative building was built, because they had forms, they built the forms, and then they craned them into place. That was not built brick by brick. That was built section by section. So that was an incredible gift that Rickard brought to our movement. Number 3 son, Royal, didn't live as long as his other brothers. That's a whole other talk as well. But he was the one who said, let us buy property out in the county. Let us get some property out in the county so we can get out of the inner city, because they're right downtown, and have a place where we can not only have the children go during the summer for a break from being in the city, but also for our workers to go and have concerts or events or picnics or whatever. So it was his vision that got us into the place where we would have Unity Village. So as you can see, each of the family members brought their own gifts to the table. So look around yourself. You know, who in your immediate family has gifts that you can balance off with or can enhance each other? I can't knit worth beans, but I am more than happy to use my abundance to buy yarn so that my girlfriend can knit things for me. And in fact, I asked her if she could knit me a prayer shawl. And this is what she knit for me. And I absolutely love it. So it's not about how, that we have to do everything and be everything, but that we can look around and say, wow, I'm really good at grilling burgers, but I'm not so good at that, taking the money and making change. So if there's an event, a fundraiser, well, we'll ask someone who's good with the money to do that part. And then we'll ask somebody who's good at decorating to present the plates in a loving and beautiful way. Lots of opportunities like this, extended family, your neighbors, especially this time of year as the harvest starts coming. The joke is, don't everybody plant zucchini, because there won't be any place to take it. You plant zucchini and you plant some corn and you plant some tomatoes, and we'll all swap out. We'll have a beautiful fall salad at the end of this. Question 4, what will sharing my gifts look like? Now, the first time I gave a talk like this was in 1997. I can tell you with absolute certainty that doing a Sunday lesson on Zoom from the comfort of my own home wasn't even on my radar. It wasn't even something I could imagine. I was still using a slide projector at the time. So at that time, sharing my gifts meant loading my car or truck, whichever I was driving, up with the slide projector and projection screen and my notes, and some handouts, and driving to wherever I was going to give the Sunday talk. And now it's totally different, and it's expanded my horizons. So what does sharing my gifts look like? Is it something that I might be able to share with Unity of Halton Peel? Is it something I can share with my local community centers? Is it something I can share with my local food bank? Is it something that I share within my family? Perhaps there's an older family member that I want to get the history from so that the next generations can know and understand what their ancestors were like and what their history is. What does it look like? It does not have to be monetized. It can be something that you give willingly and freely, or it can be something where you find, as they call, a side hustle to do. And our final question, what am I willing to receive? And I think this is really, really important because our society is so focused on giving that we often forget the receiving part. And one of the things that has inspired me, one of the Unity's early writers, Emily Cady, wrote in the preface to one of her books about how she was working on the concept of prosperity, on the principles of prosperity. And she writes that she was willing to take her medical practice and present it on a love offering basis. And that for 2 years, she would often have times where she was faint from hunger because nobody was paying the bills. And she took that into prayer and said, well, what's up? I'm doing my part. I'm giving and giving. And she had the inspiration of, you never said you would be willing to receive. And she said in that moment, in that flash of inspiration, all of a sudden, the money started to come in. The chickens started to come in. The eggs started to come in. Her clients, her patients started to give because she had unblocked that willingness to receive in herself. And every so often, I take that inventory. Is there an area where I'm not willing to receive? Because in my eyes, I think that person doesn't have enough. And so if I receive from them, I'm taking away from them. And that's something we really need to overcome, in my opinion. The idea that your prosperity consciousness is none of my business. If in your prosperity consciousness, you have enough to share with me, I receive it gratefully and graciously. And it may be something that is, tiny. Think of Jesus looking at the widow, giving her 2 mites, a very small amount as compared to the other people who were giving of, their riches. And he tells disciples, she has given her all. She is trusting that this is, going to be supplied back to her, that she will receive in appreciation for what she has given. And that's one of the lessons of Jesus that I think gets lost in the social normative of you have to buy, you have to have a lot of money. Last week, I shared with you the dedication and covenant. And I draw your attention to the second paragraph. This is the paragraph when Charles and Myrtle state what they expected, what they wanted to receive in exchange for their service, for their time, for their money, for everything they had. It being understood and agreed that the said Spirit of truth shall render unto us an equivalent for this dedication, in peace of mind, health of body, wisdom, understanding, love, life, and an abundant supply of all things necessary to meet every want without making any of these things the object of our existence. It was said that Myrtle always showed up for church very nicely dressed. Charles in the early years would actually wear tails. So there was an awareness of being prosperous, of showing and demonstrating outwardly that the principles that they were teaching about prosperity, about healing, about oneness with God as God were manifest in their lives and could be seen with human eyes. And again, I close with this idea of, I use my power of will to choose and commit and to be willing. So I invite you this week to take those 5 questions and just look in the mirror and say, okay, what is my gift? Where can I share it? How does it interlink with everyone else? And so it is. Now let's move into a time of deeper reflection. And our thought that we're going to take into this time, and I'll leave this screen up so you can look at it if needs be. Have I overlooked a gift I can share with the world, thinking it to be too small to be of use? And let us just take some time here, heart to heart, hand to hand, soul to soul. Breathing into the now space. Allowing this question just to resonate within our bodies, within our cells. Knowing that our cells hold memories. Perhaps there was something that we did as a child that was so wonderful and gave us such joy, but as we grew up, we were told it was no longer valuable. Perhaps it is something that will once again bring us joy. And we're old enough now to not mind so much about societal norms. And let's just breathe into this question in the silence. And in this awareness of gifts we may have forgotten, gifts we may have overlooked, let us take a few moments to bless and appreciate all those who have been on the journey, all those who have pushed us ever so gently, or perhaps not so gently, to share our gifts, to realize our gifts, to recognize our gifts in the silence. And for the opportunities that are about to come to us, to say yay or nay to sharing of our gifts, or perhaps to say not yet, but soon. For this opportunity to come together, to know that we are not alone on the path of life, to be a part of a greater awareness, a greater spiritual unfolding. And together we hold in light and love our silent unity affirmations for the month of August. For inner peace, the peace of God flows within each breath. For healing, in all circumstances I heal, knowing I am whole. For harmony, in the harmony of divine love, I bless my relationships. For prosperity, freely I give and freely I receive in divine abundance. And for world peace, in a spirit of peace, I seek to understand and appreciate others. And breathing into this, we give thanks for this time together. And so it is, and so it shall be. Amen.